Thank you very much for that introduction. As I said, if you want to move up closer, please do so, even if you do that while I'm talking. That's perfectly all right. It's always more pleasant to have people really in front of you. I was asked to give a talk a couple of weeks ago by Adam, who phoned me up from Pragma, and he wanted to get me here to convey a message about a transformation that we actually did within the company that I'm working. So I'm working with a company that is called Westermo Network Technologies. You most likely haven't heard of it. Most people haven't. That's perfectly all right. We do network equipment, network switches. And a switch to us is everything that is actually a router, a firewall, a VPN concentrator, anything that really has Ethernet connections in and out. That's the network switches. And we do that for industrial applications, and mainly for any type of application that requires really, really robust products, products that wouldn't work from an electronics perspective. You buy most of them off the shelf. It has to be really resilient. The availability needs to be extreme. So we have a lot of regulations when it comes to the development that we actually put into this. As you mentioned, I started developing in '84. So computer has been a part of my life for quite some time. And it has always been software development, really, that has been my sort of expertise area. I've been working with embedded real-time systems for about 10 years with telecommunications. And around 2007, I completely moved on to actually completely not developing anything myself, because I don't consider Visual Basic for applications behind Excel as development, but instead actually leading developers and people in organizations with software development. The name is Peter Johansson, as he said, in case I missed that at the start. And the topic for this talk is change beyond the ordinary. That's a high bar to say that. And I hope that once we're through this, and that's just before lunch, you will understand at least what I mean by a change beyond the ordinary. If we don't find time for questions at the end, I'll be around for the rest of the day. I'll also be part of the panel, so come hunt me down somewhere outside and ask questions, and I'll try and do my best to answer them. But let's go into the outline, shall we? I intend to give you a bit of a context so you understand really what kind of a business are we, why do we do things the way we are, what really matters for us. I'll take you back then to 2015, where we made the beginning of a great journey actually within the company, a huge transition both in terms of adding on people and making process changes. We'll go into the results and, of course, a summary at the end. And if there's anything that you don't understand, please just holler out immediately so I can at least explain that. But if you do have questions, let's keep them for the end. Let's begin with the context. These are the type of applications that our company develop products for. And we do development both in terms of electronics and operating systems for network switches. So we developed the operating system from scratch, together with the PCBs, the component assembly, put it all together. We have today around 240 different articles that run one and the same operating system for every single release that we actually make. And making releases in that context is a bit difficult, actually, and especially when it comes to quality. And quality to these customers is crucial. Train network, this is our biggest business by far. More than 50% of our turnover and revenue come from that business. But it doesn't really matter whether it's train or it's mining, marine automation, etc., etc. They all have sort of the same quality requirements. It has to work all the time. And our customers is no different from your customers. Our customers ask for specific additions into the products, just like your customers most likely do. Our customers are really, really anxious to make certain that it works all the time. And they get really pissed at us if it doesn't work. And that's fair. But quality matters to us even more importantly because when it comes to these applications, it's not just our customers who actually have a problem if it doesn't work. It's you. You will not be able to go on the train if our products fail. You will not be able to get energy in the outlet. You will not be able to get tap water when you actually open the faucet. Quality matters to us because it matters to you. So whatever we make a release of has to work the first time. There's no, we'll fix it tomorrow. Never. And taking that then into account of continuous integration, continuous deployment, we're really far away from that. That's just the way it is. If we then go back to 2015, really the starting point for why we actually decided to make a journey, or perhaps even longer, because we've had quite a long time of doing continuous integration and especially automated testing. So already in 2012, we were doing continuous integration. So every single time we made a code commit, images were built for the variety of hardware articles that our software was supposed to run on. At the same time, that software and all of those images were automatically deployed onto test systems. The test system on its own chose what tests are relevant to run this time. Given the set of changes that were introduced on that last sort of commit that was made, given the set of tests that had failed recently, given the set of tests that hadn't been executed for a period of 2 weeks, roughly, so we had a guarantee of always testing everything in the regression test suite. And testing in this level, as you can see, we had some 5 test systems in 2012, and at the end of 2015, when we started the journey, we had 10. A test system in this respect is a set of network switches. So we have a network topology. The smallest one is 4, the bigger one are 30. So 30 switches in a network. You do configuration on top of that. You test failover conditions. So you really test everything for every single commit in that distributed real-time system. And that generates a lot of test feedback that you can see on the yellow line at the bottom. So we started off by 78,000 test results being fed back to developers each quarter in 2012. And there were nearly 200,000 then by the end of 2015. And when you get test feedback in that amount on system level when testing, so it's not unit testing, system level testing, it's absolutely crucial for developers that the quality is always there. When these start to fail, we wouldn't be able to do anything when it comes to the development for the future, but only hunting bugs. So that's where we were. When it comes to the development model, it was extremely rudimentary. We were using Scrum-ish. I haven't actually seen a single company that actually uses Scrum the way it's written in the book. But when it comes to doing this, how many in here are developers or have been developers? So roughly 50% then. So the rest are managers or wannabe developers? Maybe so. When it comes to this is then how we were working then in that quarter in 2015. So we had a Scrum model, we had a feature backlog, or rather we had a fixed backlog. So even though it said Scrum, we didn't really have sprints. We had a committed scope for the next release. And the next release was a bit far away. We had a set of bugs that also went into the committed scope. We had a timeline that was fixed. We had a set of resources that were fixed, and then we headed off. And developers were actually in one single team. And the team was about 19 people. And all of them were adding changes onto that single master branch for that product continuously. And when you do changes like that into a product where you actually build an operating system, whatever change you make will most likely have an impact on your next developer. That's just the way it is. You change the memory control management, for instance, and the rest of the system is off. You add features to change how DHCP is working, that is mainly used by most customers to distribute IP addresses. And if that doesn't work, then the entire network topology will fail. So you will constantly have an impact on every single member of that development team. Notice also that some of the bugs, some of the features weren't actually finished completely once we created the release branch. So there are things on the master branch that haven't actually been completely developed, finished yet. So once we had sort of completed the agreed scope, we had to stabilize the product. And that could take an enormous amount of time. So we spent 4 to 6 calendar weeks just to stabilize the product. So going back to the quality then, we would never ever want to release a product with poor quality. So we're really keen on this. That also meant that we had to go into the release branch and actually sometimes either disable code that wasn't finished, or we had to dig it out so it's not part of the product in that specific release. So a lot of extra work was also added on top of that release work. And even those changes then needed to be stabilized. Back in these days, we had 2 different teams. We had the developers who actually made the WeOS operating system implementations, and we had a test team that did test automation scripts. And the test team were so few compared to the developers that the developers quite often had finished the development, finished in quotation marks simply because it wasn't really tested yet. But they wanted to hand it off to the testers so they could actually write the test script so that the developers could get feedback. But what happens when you don't get feedback tomorrow? If you're a developer, you've already moved on. You're doing something else. And then finally, when the feedback comes back, you start wondering, oh, but this should work, right? It did when I tested it, I think. In what context was that? Oh, yeah, maybe I should start digging. So they did the context switch, they went back, then fixed that, they introduced a new change, and then something else failed. Do you recognize yourselves in this? At least one. And the rest of you just excel. So, quality to us came with poor time to market. There was quality in every single release. We didn't really have problems with that when we actually launched things to our customers. But it was really expensive to do that, and it took quite some time. And time to market in this respect is measured from when the features that we want to include into the release have been completed until we've made the release work. So that is finalizing the release notes, making certain the customer documentation is there, making certain we can actually roll it out in production, rolling it out onto our website so customers can download, etc. And that took 4 to 6 weeks. It included the majority of our developers for that duration of time. And that cost us around 60 man-weeks per release, where all of the planned development was completely disrupted. We couldn't do anything that we actually planned for the future because everything was on that single branch. And everyone was stabilizing. If you look at it from a yearly total, we made some 3 to 4 releases on that product yearly. So we actually spent nearly 200 man-weeks of not adding value to the customers, unless you count quality, of course. But we didn't really add features. We were lagging behind constantly. We couldn't really do the planned development simply because the quality wasn't there from the start. And that was a big problem to us. So with that, we needed to make a change. And I felt that I had to make that sort of start of that change. In the company, I'm the software manager, which means I'm responsible for the entire software development. I noticed that we needed to make the entire team to collaborate together to actually make a transition into something where they would actually own how we work and own how we do things. And the journey that we embarked on, it started in October 2015. We had a kickoff meeting. I'd assembled all of the software developers and all of the software test developers in a single room. We had a conference for an entire day, and I conveyed the message that we needed to make a huge change. We needed to go from where we then spent these 4 to 6 calendar weeks of doing stabilization into setting a goal for ourselves to be able to release new software versions within a working week with defined content and acceptable quality. And that we should do at any point in time. So imagine for yourselves what these developers thought of that. I mean, 50% of you are developers yourself. You know that you're stabilizing 4 to 6 weeks every single time. It's a big hassle to make these releases work. And I'm standing here as your manager in front of you say, we need to change. We should do this. We should be able to make it within a week. And I also said that I think that this transition is going to take us about 2 years to accomplish. What do you think happened? How do you think the people looked? Yeah, that's a good one. Were they believers? Exactly that was the very first response. Jaw-dropping. I mean, people literally dropped their jaws, and they looked at me as if I was stupid. Some sort of, it shone through their eyes, some shrugged, some just sat back, and it was dead silent. Then one of the guys in the team says, "Oh, so you're going to send us on typewriting courses so we can write code faster?" If you've been involved in making changes in a company, you're probably familiar with sort of when people see that change is coming and they're not really over the hill understanding why we should do that, understanding what it really gives to them. And this was one of them, at least there. And then, after about a minute, one of the guys raises his arm and he says, "Hey, Peter, I think you're wrong. It's not going to take us 2 years to get there. We can do it much faster." So we started that single day. We sat down together, and this was really crucial for the change itself, to involve the team in this. So I wanted the team to define the solutions themselves. And this really ties back to things like Camille spoke of earlier on this morning. She said things like, not a big bang. You should involve the team, for instance. And that's just key when it comes to change management. I wanted people to actually develop the solutions themselves so they were actually owning that transition. We have a common goal. We know where we're going. But they should define how we get there. That means that they will actually drive it themselves. It should be something that actually comes from them, so it's really becoming something that's in it for them. That was extremely important. So we started to ask a set of questions. And the first one was, what do we need to be able to release in a week? And the team said, we need a stable master branch. And that's something that we really didn't have. Every single change we made introduced something that really sort of swept away the feet for everybody else. Okay, so stable master branch. That's not so hard, is it? Don't change it. So how do we get a stable master branch then? It should only contain the results from finished development. And finished, in this respect, was requirements, architecture, design, implementation, test, customer documentation. And test was extremely tricky since it should then work on these couple of hundred different hardware articles at the same time. So we kept on asking, how do we get finished results on the master branch? We need to develop changes on individual branches instead. It doesn't sound so hard, does it? Well, it was to us. What do we need to be able to finalize development on individual branches? Well, for us, one of the key problems was actually that we need test feedback per branch then. Because otherwise the developers wouldn't actually know the results of the changes that they introduce on branches. So now we had two very fundamental things to look at. We needed to be able to enable branching and to enable test feedback on those branches. But we also made another change immediately, and that is to change the Scrum-ish part to use Kanban instead. And the main reason for that is that we didn't really use sprints. Even though we had fixed scope, the scope always changed. And Kanban in that respect mimics the real world, in our opinion, much better. It embraces change at every point in time continuously. There's no such thing as debating whether or not we're following the Scrum way of doing things. So we changed that. Then we started developing our automated test framework so it actually could do testing on more than one branch at a time. And that's what we did then in Q4 in 2015. And by Q1 2016, we took the first steps. So we started doing branching. This probably isn't really that too dramatic for you guys. I wouldn't think so. But with this branching, we did all of the work when it came to requirements and design, development and test, etc., on every single individual branch for a single feature at a time. That also meant that we could actually change our priorities, and we can change what was actually important to work on instantly. And if the top feature branch there was really getting a lower priority due to whatever reason, we could just halt that work, and it didn't disrupt anything, because there was nothing committed to the master branch. There were no other branches dependent on that, so it didn't really make much of a problem to anyone. At this point in time, we also still had the developers doing feature additions for the product, and we had the test team doing test script additions for that product. So that we still had a bit of a problem actually getting feedback to the developers, because the test team didn't have the capacity to provide all of the test scripts in the timely manner that was needed for all of the developers to get feedback on. We also still made all of the bug fixes on the master branch, so still instability. Then in end of June 2016, we made the first release in the context of this change model. And that was actually quite successful, much more so than some of the previous releases we made. But if we take a look at the supporting frameworks that helped us do this. So in 2015 Q4, 11 test systems, 3 branches. We had 12 branches by the end of, or mid-2016 instead. And that also meant a significant raise in number of test results feedback during that time as well. So we went up to 310,000 test results per quarter to a setup team of about 25 people that should be able to manage that result. There we had a bit of a visualization problem when it came to, so what are the results then? And we did some changes on that as well. But we knew that we were heading on the right track. This was really, really working for us. The release work took 2 days. 2 days instead of 4 to 6 weeks. I'll take it again, 2 days. To us, this was a huge step. But we still had problems actually with stability on the master branch. So we needed to evolve further. So moving on to Q3 then in 2016, we actually also made sure that we did all of the bug fix development directly on individual branches instead. So anything that goes into the master branch is actually something that is of releasable quality. And it's finished. Customer documentation as well. We also made another change, and that is that developing test scripts became part of the developer's work. So the test team instead solely focused on making certain that the developers had test solutions. The test systems were their responsibility. The test framework was their responsibility. But the test scripts were the developer's responsibility. And that drove two major changes. And one was the developers were actually empowered to decide on when they wanted feedback. If they want feedback by tomorrow, they will have to develop the test script so they can get feedback by tomorrow. They decide. A bonus that came was that the testers that earlier on wrote the test scripts had been complaining about that developers didn't write testable code. But now the developers had to write test scripts for their or their peers' code. So they started actually changing the way they were developing things to write testable code. That was a bonus. By the end of 2017, we had connected a way of working with Kanban with phases, where all these phases then are represented on the branches. We established ways of working with configuration management, where developers have been developing the process documentation of how to do configuration management. So they have decided how we should do that. They came to the conclusion that we should do branches. With that, a lot of flexibility came, because that means that as a developer in our company, you can actually do whatever change you want, and if it proves to be a good one, we'll include it into the product. If it's a bad one, well, hopefully you learn something and we can throw it away. It's not really a problem. Quality assurance is always there. We get test feedback from all branches continuously. We do continuous improvement. We focus on flow, although you might be able to see that it's really weak. Good. I grayed out limit work in progress because we weren't doing that in 2017. But we did visualize work. This comes with really, really low administrative costs. And when we started the change, I was very keen on trying to get people to understand that whenever we change how we work, it needs to be easy for developers to work in this process. If it takes a little more time for me as a manager to look into where we are, that's fine, because it's truly the developers that actually add value to the customers. Visibility is important, but it's still more important that developers can actually see for themselves and work in this environment. So what happened with the supporting frameworks then? 17 test systems, 25 code branches roughly at the end of 2017, 360,000 test results. And that's even though the number of test cases, the test scripts themselves, didn't actually increase that much. So the majority of the increase in this is actually the correlation between number of test systems versus number of branches to test. So let's look at the results, shall we? Anyone interested? We know for sure that this is the right track. We've seen that quite substantially now. 90% of our releases during the period between 2015 to 2017, where we also added one person per month to the team, so we had to integrate them continuously, were made in a week. The releases that we didn't make within a week was simply because we changed scope. So even that was actually under control. 1 man week of release work, that is compared then to the 60 man weeks of work earlier on. And no development disruption. So we can actually make the plans, we followed the plans, we could do the releases, and continue with the development for the next release as well. Another really beautiful thing about this is that as we grow, we've seen that if we had stayed with a previous model instead of going here, we would have continued to increase the waste continuously. So with this change, it scales really, really effectively with the size of the company. So we're saving more and more as the software team actually grows. But we got another bonus. This we didn't see actually when we started. Since we're doing development on these branches now, and we get all of these system-level testing on every single code branch, we can do development for customers that ask for specific changes into our COTS product, the commercial off-the-shelf product, and we can involve customers in testing that, if they want to. And that's not really something new, is it? Well, what's new is that we can actually tell them the quality level on that drop. We know that the only changes that we made were the ones requested by the customer. We run regression level testing on system level on that product together with other network products, so we can tell them how it actually is working before they actually get it. They are more inclined of actually providing feedback because they will give us feedback on exactly the changes that they ask for. They don't have to worry about that other things broke as well. And if they did break because we broke them, we can tell them in advance. So let's round up with a bit of a summary. I told you why quality is important to us, and that is because you're involved in that. I took you back to 2015, where we wasted a lot of time in making these releases, some 60 man-weeks per release. I spoke of the journey where we involved the people quite heavily into actually making the changes. And make no mistake, I mean, even though we actually involve people in making these changes, not everyone are happy, of course. And that is simply because everyone has their own set of ideas on how to do this, and you cannot implement that change to everyone's suggestion. You have to compromise here and there. And then the results, of course. Reducing the waste of making these releases from 60 to 1 man week, that's a 90 and 98% change in waste reduction. And that, to me, is really a change beyond the ordinary. Thank you very much for listening.